What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is your boy Frankie Bones, and in today's video, I have a banger for you guys. We are going to be previewing Super Bowl LVII, which will be taking place on February 12th at 6:30 p.m. Coming up this weekend, obviously, as you guys know, we have the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in a great matchup. Probably two of the best teams from each conference that we've seen throughout the year. So we'll take a deep dive into this. We'll talk about some initial betting trends of the game. We will go through and talk about some historical Super Bowl trends. And finally, I will give you guys the Frankie Bones Parlay, in addition to some player props if you guys want to bet them on the side. If you guys want to build your own parlay, I'll just go through, tell you guys a little bit about the picks that I like, and we'll see if we can't make a little bit of coin this weekend. Now, before we get too far into this, like I've been mentioning in my football videos before, this video does involve gambling and the talks of gambling. So if you or someone that you know is having difficulties with a gambling problem, or it's negatively affecting your life or somebody around you, please feel free to reach out to 1-800-GAMBLER or reach out to your local gaming board, your state's gaming board, and they'd be happy to provide you some additional resources to assist you with any problems that you may be having. Now, as we get into this a little bit, we will start things off by talking about some of the initial betting trends since the line was released when it came out, what's sort of been happening with the wagers that have been placed, and where we stand today. I'm recording this video on Monday night to try and get it out for you guys here on Tuesday early, so you guys have plenty of time to watch the video, listen to what I have to say, and just have my perspective on the game and ultimately what I think will happen. That's typically how I like to talk about the games and how I sort of formulate down to the script, how I think the script will go in the game, and that's oftentimes how I get to my bets that I like to put in. So the first thing that we'll talk about in terms of the initial betting trends, as you can see, was a little bit surprising. The Chiefs came out as 1-point favorites. This came out, immediately after the AFC Championship game 2 weekends ago, where the Chiefs were able to take down the Cincinnati Bengals. Patrick Mahomes finally gets his win over Joe Burrow, and the over-under was set at 50 points even. Now, talking a little bit about how this line has transitioned, obviously, until now. Within about the first 12 hours of the line being live, tongue twister there, the line shifted a whole 3.5 points. It went from Kansas City as a 1-point favorite to the Eagles being 2.5-point favorites, which is definitely pretty interesting, but at the same time, obviously the Eagles have been playing incredibly well. They've looked very impressive in the 2 games they've played in the playoffs after struggling a little bit coming across the line. Obviously, Jalen was injured for that. And even coming back in that last week against the Giants, sort of just getting their footing under them. And a little note that I added under this sort of trend that we saw was, I forget where I saw this stat from. I think I saw it on Twitter. So shout out whoever that was, but 21 of the 25 initial bets that were placed that were all over $10,000 were on the Eagles. So sort of some things to weed through with that. Obviously, gambling is legal in the state of Pennsylvania, so there will be a lot of wagers placed on the Eagles, and sometimes the numbers from brick and mortar casinos won't always come in as fast. And it's not legal to bet in Missouri, I don't believe, at this moment. So, certainly some access to wagering sort of bias within the line, but obviously there's a lot of diehard Eagles fans. A lot of people think that they're the more dominant team in this scenario, so definitely understand how the line was inflated at that point over to 2.5 points. But where we sit at the current moment, we have the Philadelphia Eagles as 1.5-point favorites, and the over-under has shifted just up a tick, up half a point to 50.5. So another quick note on sort of where we are at the moment. We have about 77% of the money on the Philadelphia Eagles. So again, could just be biased from placing bets. People traveling out maybe don't have their bets in. Some people trying to wait until the line gets a little closer. We see some injuries, but we'll talk about that here as we get into some breakdowns. I'm going to be giving you guys the matchups of the offenses versus the defenses with some pretty basic stats, obviously, for you guys to just look at. But I'll go more in depth about specific matchups between skill groups or position groups, and we'll ride along that way as we talk about the two sides. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Kansas City Chiefs offense versus the Philadelphia Eagles defense. Now, again, all these stats are, very generic stats, and a lot of people are probably mad about me putting them up. But just as a reference, sometimes it's good to look at things sort of holistically and sort of form your opinions not off of these things, but these are things that, have happened. Obviously, strength of schedule, teams you play are all different, but just as a reference point, sort of an X's and O's, a black and white sort of thing, I wanted to show you guys some stats. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but what I will focus on first is at the bottom, talking about some advantages that I think each side may have. By advantages, I just think that these are position groups or elements that are in favor or are one of the more positive factors for that side of the ball. So for the Kansas City Chiefs, we'll talk about quarterback. Patrick Mahomes is incredible. He's won the MVP. He's won the Super Bowl before. So I think that definitely an advantage for the Kansas City Chiefs offense is Patrick Mahomes. He'll definitely be a little bit more healthy off that ankle, about 2 weeks out. He looked okay in the Bengals game, but was able to get through, so I don't think that we'll have any troubles there with Patty. Obviously, Travis Kelce's a monster, and I do love the offensive line group for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that they're strong. They've remained pretty healthy up until this point. They have great continuity, and I think that this is one of the pluses of the Kansas City Chiefs offense. Maybe I should have put it as pluses or something different. But flipping over to the Eagles, we have advantages for the defensive line. Their group has been just absolutely incredible between Reddick and Graham on the outsides. They have incredible interior defensive line depth, signing Linval Joseph, bringing on Ndamukong Suh. Definitely a big positive for this group. It looks like they're going to break the all-time season record for sacks. Obviously, it includes the postseason because they've been feasting the past 2 weeks, but, I would be very confident in this group to be able to make plays and get stops. And in addition, for the advantage for the defense, I have their cornerback group, and more just their defensive secondary has just been incredibly strong. They've been very opportunistic when people try and make plays or sort of take shots. They've throughout the year been able to get those takeaways, steal extra possessions, and that's really what it's all about in the postseason and obviously in the Super Bowl here on the biggest stage. So those are some strengths I have. Just talking about some other notes that I have written down. Obviously, we are waiting pretty patiently for word on the health of the Kansas City Chiefs receiving group. Today, we just saw that Mecole Hardman was put on the IR. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was activated. I'm not sure how much of a factor he's really going to be. I think they really like the 1-2 dynamic that they have going on right now with Isaiah Pacheco and as well with Jerick McKinnon. I think he might see a lot of work depending on, sort of the game that we're going to see from both sides. And, I'm not really trying to pick, offense versus defense. One will win, one won't. Just sort of laying some of this stuff out. But, this Philly D has looked incredibly strong. All those guys that I mentioned are absolute playmakers. No reason to believe that they're going to shy down in the moment. They've been great all year. I won't say they've, played the best teams down the stretch as a great sample point, but throughout the year they've been incredibly strong. They've only gotten stronger, brought more guys back, some guys coming back from injury. So from a standpoint of being pretty comfortable, I think that the Eagles defense is in a great position to be able to make some plays and, stop Patrick Mahomes to as much as they can. He's still going to be able to, in theory, get out of the pocket, make some plays off script. Travis Kelce, who we'll talk about, a lot as we get down to the bets, he's obviously going to be there. He's been on a tear throughout the postseason. Throughout the season, he had 12 touchdowns, absolute monster. So there are things that the Eagles defense will have to try and find answers for, but, looking at it from this standpoint, Patrick's going to need some receivers. Not sure where their status is going to be at, so that may be something that they're going to have to overcome and try and game plan around. All right, so now we will flip sides of the ball. We're going to be talking about the Philadelphia Eagles offense versus the Kansas City Chiefs defense. Now, again, numbers just for reference, sort of a black and white standpoint. And I forgot to mention in the previous clip, on the left side of sort of the dividers for each team, that's going to be the regular season numbers, and on the right side is going to be the playoff numbers. Again, these numbers don't always mean a ton, just sort of a reference point to how the teams have been playing in a way, and sort of an indirect comparison. So, again, sorry about the boring stats, but just wanted to put that up as sort of a simple thing for you guys to look at while I talk about some of the breakdowns. So as we go through some of the advantages for the teams, for the Eagles offense, realistically, it is the entire offense, but in particular, wanted to shout out the entire offensive line. They've been playing incredible. I think the Giants do have a good front, and they did an incredible job of running the ball against them, 250-plus rushing yards. I think that this is the scheme and the way that they're going to want to play is run the ball really effectively, have the ability to pull it with Hurts on QB keepers, break the pocket, and just really create some dynamic plays. Their offensive line's done a great job of, within their scheme, sort of passing off responsibilities, using motion to sort of move guys and create a favorable situation, whether it be on the backside, whether to be able to work double teams, or just sort of have guys hit the wrong gap, and boom, there you go for a home run. So I love this offensive line group. Travis Kelce may be having the best season of his career. All around the team is just great. Lane Johnson's definitely holding up. That was definitely an issue for a little while. I wouldn't say an issue, but definitely a concern of some people is really how healthy is he. He's been dominant. Mailata, Dickerson, all those guys have been great. Wide receiving group, I think their duo of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith is great. I think that they have been hitting on their deep shots. I think that this is somewhere that Kansas City is really going to have to limit. I think that they're going to have to make the Eagles earn everything, which I think they're more than happy to sort of take their ground and pound, not shying away from going for it on fourth down. So obviously they are going to step up to that challenge, but when the deep shots are there, they're going to have to hit them. I think overall just their scheme is great. I think when they're really humming, running the ball well, it's just very difficult to stop this offensive group. And talking now about the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously just sort of two keys here. Just because overall I don't think their defensive unit's outstanding, so I think it's going to be critical for them to take advantage of opportunities, whether that be a fumble or an interception, or just honestly getting stops. I think they're going to have to try and do their best to limit the possessions for the Eagles and give Patrick Mahomes and the guys a chance to cook and sort of keep them in the game. Some notes that I just have initially written down here for the Kansas City defense. Steve Spagnuolo, he is that guy. He's been there before. He won 2 Super Bowls as the defensive coordinator for the Giants. Obviously, had to get my G-men in here somewhere. In addition to winning with the Kansas City Chiefs a few years ago, their coaching crew has been consistent throughout the past couple years. Andy Reid, obviously an all-time NFL coach. Eric Bieniemy still around, so although the offensive system has changed a little bit, I love the comfortability with all three of those guys. And, they've all just been there. And with the defensive line, I think Frank Clark and Chris Jones are really going to have impactful games. We saw Chris Jones at the end of the Bengals game make an incredible sack on that third down, lining him up on the outside. Normally he's on the inside. Their guys on defense are going to have to step up and make plays. Looking at their defense again, they don't have a ton of just absolute studs, but they have guys that can absolutely have an impact on the game. Obviously, I mentioned Chris Jones and Frank Clark, but you also have Bolton and Willie Gay. They're two linebackers. Nick Bolton, I think these guys are going to have to be, wouldn't say aggressive in the run game. I'm sure they've been going through a ton of film and a ton of practice on how to try and contain Jalen Hurts, and as well just have enough guys in the box, play smart, play fast, and try and limit some of those big plays. In addition, I put down Trent McDuffie, the rookie. He's going to have to really step up. This is a really talented wide receiver group for the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm not sure if he really shadows or if he stays on one side, but he's going to have to show up and try and make a play down the stretch. And honestly, just throughout the game to really try and keep them in, limit those deep shots. Again, that's what Philly's going to try and do. When they're there, they hit them. So it's going to be on him to really try and get that stop. And obviously, talking about the Philly offense, we sort of talked about them. A key in this game, the linebackers may have to keep their eyes on Dallas Goedert. I think that, he's a very talented tight end. He had the great one-hand catch against the Giants. On this very talented offensive group, I think it's easy for him to sort of slip the net, pick up some key third downs. I think it's when they go to him a lot, and also down in the red zone. So definitely got to keep an eye on him as well. But, here again, it just sort of leans me towards the Eagles. I mean, their offenses look phenomenal. They've been dominant in running the football, looking at some of those numbers. Rushing the football, they've been absolutely great. The emergence of Miles Sanders again. Obviously, after last year not having scored a touchdown. But even guys like Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott, they're not playing against the Giants, but definitely can be big factors as they look to run the ball a ton, slow down the game, limit the possessions, and be able to capitalize on their drives. I think they're a great red zone team, especially how they're able to run the ball so well. Such great push from the offensive line. So definitely some more one-on-one battles, I think, in this scenario than on the Chiefs offense versus Eagles defense. But, that'll sort of do it for the breakdowns. Again, just a lot of key players, a lot of preparation going in, obviously 2 weeks leading up to it. So we'll see how everybody shows up on Sunday. So transitioning now, we will talk about some historical Super Bowl trends. I have 8 here for you guys. There's a ton that you can pull. Some of these favor the Chiefs. Some of these favor the Eagles. Some of these talk about the under. Just sort of some fun things for you guys to keep in mind if you guys like placing sort of game props, things like that. And also just sort of paints a picture of typically how the Super Bowl is played and what typically is going to happen in certain scenarios. So the first thing that I have, I'm going to start in this left column, and we will work on over to the right. But the first thing is that Super Bowl winners have covered 87% of the time, meaning that if you think that a team is going to win, they're going to cover. Obviously, 1.5 points is not a lot for the Eagles. A lot of people think they may win by double digits, but just a very interesting stat. The team that wins, they're going to cover. Obviously, if an underdog wins, they cover. But this also speaks to that of the favorites as well. A lot of times they aren't super big, usually, less than 4 or 5 points. But just a note, if they're going to win, they're going to cover. Next one we're going to talk about, favorites are 37 and 19, straight up, all time in the Super Bowl. Obviously, this favors the Eagles. By this time, we sort of have figured out who teams are, what they're going to try and do. The Eagles are great, and this isn't a slight. They just always have a great, because I just don't want it to sound like one. They have a great scheme. I think they game plan for teams very well, so obviously that favors the Eagles. Although of late, obviously a great record for the favorites all time. Underdogs have won 7 of the last 11, so this would obviously favor the Chiefs. Everybody loves a good underdog story. There is a little bit of consistency. Sometimes it's always tough in the Super Bowl to get the line, especially if it's close. So obviously a good sort of indication for the Chiefs. Now moving on to the last bullet here on the bottom left. Teams that have scored first have won 68% of Super Bowls all time. This is actually a really interesting stat. You would think that this would sort of align, and obviously, the numbers would support that. But, as we'll get into some more stats, it's really difficult to score on that first possession. Lots of jitters. Teams coming out and game planning. You're not sure exactly what they're going to be coming out with. So it's not always a team that gets the ball first. Obviously big plays can be made, but definitely an interesting stat nonetheless, with teams that scoring first winning at almost a 70% clip. Now moving on to the right, 4 more really interesting stats for you guys. And this one favors the Eagles in particular, or should favor the Eagles, is that the team with more rush yards are, winning at a 73.6% clip against the spread, and also a 73.2% straight up. Eagles have been pretty dominant on the ground. Their offensive line group has had an awesome postseason as well as just regular season as a whole. So that one here is probably going to heavily favor the Eagles. Moving on down, teams that have won the coin toss are 0-8 straight up in the last 8 Super Bowls. Definitely pretty interesting. Tails does sort of dominate the win-loss for winning the Super Bowl, so we'll have to see what the guys come out with. But, maybe want to lose that coin toss, and that may also support one of the other historical trends, 68%, that score first win. If we're able to get that ball, score first, and, also get it at halftime, obviously could be a big momentum booster. Moving down as well, the over-under just about 50% across all of the Super Bowls. The under has hit in 5 of the last 7. So again, this would lean pretty heavy under. The total again at 50.5, which is pretty high for a Super Bowl. And sort of rounding out our stats, totals of over 48 are 2 and 9 in the over-under. Again, leaning under, this is a fair amount of points. Obviously, if there's only 11 games that have had a total over 48, that's sort of telling us that's a ton of points when we get down to it in the big game. So those are just a few trends historically about the Super Bowl. Obviously, these are all, sort of dumb stats. Obviously, it's 2 unique teams playing each time, different venues, all stuff like that. But just for your guys' enjoyment, if you guys are looking for any props, those are maybe some things to look at as you're placing your bets. Now, finally, we're going to be going over some of my game picks, some of my player props, as well as the Frankie Bones Parlay. Hasn't been hitting. Obviously, the Niners was a tough look, but never know, obviously, if Brock Purdy doesn't end up getting hurt in that game. But either way, we move on. We're going to lower the odds just a little bit, just to see if we can secure some coin. So going down on the left side, that is the Frankie Bones Parlay at plus 575. We have the Eagles with the spread minus 1.5. Again, 87% of the time, if they're going to win, they're going to cover. So at that point, it just makes too much sense to not take them with the spread. Being 1.5 obviously isn't a ton. I see it being, more than just a 1-point game. So feel pretty comfortable with that. I have Travis Kelce over 7.5 receptions at plus 110. He's been an absolute monster. He had 14 catches in their first game, against the Jaguars. He's incredible in the postseason. He's had a great season again, 12 receiving touchdowns. I think the connection's too good with Patty, especially if their wide receiver group is a little bit depleted. Again, Hardman already out. We have Juju Smith and Kadarius Toney both sort of questionable leading up to the game, so stay tuned for any news on that. But to round it out as well, I have Patrick Mahomes over 275. In terms of passing yards, I think he's going to need to keep them in the game. I think they're going to have a difficult time running the football. Hopefully they're able to protect him, but I'll take the over with Patty. He's a gunslinger. And to round it out, I have Jalen Hurts over 40 rushing yards. I think obviously they're going to have to try and stop the run somehow. I think in big games he's going to step up, going to be willing to take hits on the body. And I think ultimately he may spring one or two 10-plus yard runs, and that gets you halfway there. So that'll round out at plus 575. All these odds are from the FanDuel Sportsbook. Then going into some of the player props, I have Travis Kelce anytime, which is minus 125. That's basically a smart bet in any game. Doesn't matter who they're playing. Travis Kelce always sniffs out the end zone, so definitely a good parlay builder. I also have Jalen Hurts under 238.5 passing yards. That's minus 114. Now realizing I didn't put some of the odds over here on the left side. But Patty Mahomes is just a tick under. I think it was like 290 something. So will be a little bit of a hit. I think it was like minus 170. And the same thing with Jalen Hurts. I think he was right around 50. So probably minus 175. You guys can let me know in the comments down below if you guys are putting that in. But I think that Jalen Hurts under passing yards, I think that's just really not a part of the game script. I think that if they're able to effectively run the ball, really wear this Chiefs defense down, I don't think he's going to hit this total. May get to 225, 200, but I think that's a high amount to expect for him to throw the football. I like the under 50.5 points. I think just based off of game script, I think that the Eagles are effectively going to be able to run the football, drain that clock. I think that the defense will show up at times. So, and everybody loves field goals in the Super Bowl. Points are at a premium. Always try and score when you can. But I think as well, I think guys will want to play safe, play the field. And so for that reason, I'll take the under, as well as some of the trends we've seen that I brought up before. And the last thing, a little bit heavier on the hit at minus 210, but I like Patrick Mahomes over 1.5 passing touchdowns. I just think that he's going to have to. Obviously, it's minus 210, so this is something that you're going to want to include, in a 3-4 leg parlay, to where you can get up to, plus 500, plus 600. But I really just think that this is going to hit. I think that they're going to have to sling the ball. Ultimately, when they get down in the red zone, sort of Travis Kelce, he'll look for Kelce or, any of his other guys that are going to be out there. But minus 210 might be a little bit rich. But at the same time, I think that it could be a safe bet depending on who's available. So definitely stay tuned on that. See if guys are going to be rolled in with Juju and Kadarius Toney. But that's going to do it, guys. The Super Bowl's coming up. I'm super excited about it. Can't wait to watch the game. That's obviously what I'm going to be betting on. Probably sprinkle in a few other things on the side, which I may tweet out on my Twitter at Frankie Bones YT. But for now, guys, that is going to do it for this episode. Really appreciate all the recent support on the past few videos, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Peace out.